started in a couple minutes. Let's go ahead and get started. Oh man, thank you guys so much for joining Read to Lead Live. This is our last one for this school year. We've had an excellent school year so far, and now we have the pleasure of ending our season with Hannah and Lance. Thank you guys so much for being here. So I'm Kumara. I'm your host of Read to Lead Live. As many of you know, Read to Lead helps you be the boss in a virtual workplace scenario. The game you played today for today's show was Career Crossroads, where you use building relationships to make decisions and lead your team. Hannah Ayers and Lance Warren are Emmy-winning married documentary filmmakers working at the intersection of history and social justice. Their company, Field Studio, has been based in Richmond, Virginia since 2014. Their work includes an outrage about the history and legacy of lynching in the American South, and the PBS series, The Future of America's Past, which explores how artists, activists, and curators remember complex changes of American history. Their first feature-length film, How the Monuments Came Down, premiered in the summer of 2021 and is available to stream on pbs.org. Hannah and Lance, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Kumara. Thank you so much for having us. Thanks to everybody who's here. We're happy and excited to be here.
Yes, you all have had such an amazing lineup of guests, so we're honored to be part of it.
Awesome. And so we love to kick off by asking you, what's a fun fact about yourself?
Well, I have a fun fact / story. When I was in 6th grade, I had a social studies teacher who said, okay, I'm giving you all a challenge. If you can memorize all of the king and queens of England throughout history and recite them in order, I will let you put a pie in my face on the last day of school. So I took this on and was really serious about it. I really wanted to do this. And so I set to work, trying to memorize all the king and queens of England. There have been 61 over the course of England's history. So I came in and I did it. I recited all of them in order. I go home and tell my mom this, and she said, oh, congratulations, that's wonderful. But we're going on a road trip this summer. You're gonna miss the last day of school. So I never got to pie the teacher in the face. And, I was trying to remember his name the other day to see if maybe he was retiring soon. I could go back, but no luck yet.
Man, what a great story. Lance, what about you?
Well, this helps explain why we don't eat a lot of pie. There must be a lot of repressed, frustration there. So we'll have to work on that. Life is long. Well, I am a spelling bee failure and a geography bee champion. When I was in 1st grade, I had the opportunity to compete in the like school-wide spelling bee. We'd done a classroom spelling bee and I'd won that. And I was going to be in the school-wide spelling bee. And my parents were very excited about this. They both took off work. That wasn't an easy thing. You know, they worked these hourly jobs. This was going to cost them something, as I would appreciate later as an adult with guilt. And they came in, and I'm there representing the first grade, you know, and I get my first word is called out in this big auditorium. My word as a first grader is bus. And I'm very excited. I think, you know, the little like 7-year-old Lance is like, oh, I know how to spell bus. And I'm so excited that I spell it really quickly. And I said, B-U-K. And I kind of catch myself. And the judge says, I'm sorry, could you say that again? And I said, B-U-S. And she says, I'm sorry, we have to take what you first said. And so within about 30 seconds of my spelling bee performance, I was done. And my parents were hopefully not regretting that they had taken off work all day. But then a few years later, I arrive at school one morning in 4th grade. I'm told that there's a geography bee happening. Would I like to be involved? And yes, sure. And I compete as a 4th grader against like other 4th graders and 5th graders, and I win. And that still surprises me to this day. So call it luck, but it was a bit of a bee redemption, I guess.
I love that. I love that. And do you still have all the kings and queens of England memorized?
I do not. I would be hard pressed to cite more than 3.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up your elementary school experiences. So what did you want to be when you were in middle school, or, you know, when you were about 10 years old?
Yeah, this is a good question. I actually just had a refresher of what my 10-year-old memory was, because I was presented a box of childhood journals by my parents recently. And so I was reading through, and I saw that when I was around 10 years old, I wanted to be either a writer or a photographer. And it's interesting, I'm neither of those things, but our work today actually intersects with both of those things. You know, photography, film, they're both visual media. And I actually do a surprising amount of writing as part of our job of being documentary filmmakers, because we always have to be pitching new projects. We have to convince funders and distributors that this is a vision they want to get behind. So yeah, I think some of my early interests may have kind of funneled in an accidental way.
And I know when I was an elementary school student, I wanted to be a garbage truck pickup guy by day and a doctor by night. My parents said that I wanted to be helpful, and I think I can appreciate it as an adult. It might have also been that I'm not really content just doing kind of one thing, or focusing on one thing for any long length of time. I get bored, and I want to. So I've definitely pursued careers that allow me to do something for a few months, maybe a year, and then kind of shift up what I'm doing. Keeping it interesting. So I guess even as a little kid, I realized I wasn't going to be satisfied just being a garbage truck guy or just being a doctor. Going to have to do both, but I still haven't actually done either of those jobs. So I don't know if I'm seeing out that vision fully.
I love that. That's so funny. So tell us a little bit about how you did get into this career. Sort of, what was your major in college? If you went to college, were you always thinking about filmmaking documentary work from, once you got into college? Just tell us a little bit more about that journey.
Sure. It was an accident.
Yeah. So both of us studied history. I studied history and French in college and thought I would go into the nonprofit world and maybe work overseas. And I, dabbled in a lot of different things, archaeology and politics. So filmmaking really came about actually years after college. And it's interesting, it really does tie into things that I was interested in early on and just didn't really know what filmmaking could be as a career. But I loved storytelling. I loved theater as a young person. And both of those things really feed into documentary filmmaking. I always loved meeting new people and asking questions and talking to them. That feeds into it too. But yeah, the way we actually got into it was very much accidental.
Yeah, I was, so we had started dating in 2009, and about 6 months later, we're living in this town. We were both really underemployed. We couldn't seem to find the right job. The economy was crashing. I had this very, very part-time job at a university, and during a meeting when I was there one day, the guy who was running the department that I was working in kind of pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I've been working on this history of this community here in town for a long time, and I'd really like to engage the city with the history of that community more, with the history of that neighborhood. And I'm not really sure how to do it. I mean, I wrote this book chapter. I don't know how many people read it. We did a little pop-up public exhibit. Not sure a lot of people know it. I'd like to make a film, a documentary film. And at this point, like I had never made a film. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't have any gear. I didn't have any training. But again, I was very underemployed and young and maybe stupid enough and ambitious enough. So when he said, I'd like to make a documentary film, is that something you could take on? I said, oh yeah, definitely. And so Hannah comes home that evening, and I say, hey, so I agreed to do this thing, and I clearly don't know what I'm doing, but maybe we could figure it out together. And so we made a plan on a napkin over dinner one night, and a year later, through a lot of trial and a lot of error, we had made our first film. We took it to a film festival, won an award, and decided, we had fun doing that. Maybe we should do that again. And that's kind of how we got down that path. I also studied history as an undergrad and as a graduate student. Did not expect to be doing this remotely, but most of the work that we've done has actually been about American history in various ways. And it's just been striking to see how that's played out, that it's been an opportunity to actually tell stories about the past, engage people with stories about the past in a way that's in many ways more dynamic than the models that I was presented in school. And to the extent that this is a technical profession, you have to learn how to use a camera or use an editing system. We've discovered that a lot of that is knowing what buttons to push. And you can learn that, right? There are manuals for that. There are YouTube videos for that. There are friends who can help you along. And all of those things helped us and continue to help us. What is harder to just kind of like pick up on the fly is a sort of deep understanding and judgment about how to tell a story accurately, how to tell a story in a way that really reveals the past and reveals truth. And that's the sort of thing that I think from our studies and from various life experiences, we've been fortunate to gain. And so it's not a path that we set out to pave, but it's one that we're grateful to be on, and that we've actually been able to draw a lot from our education and life experience in ways that we didn't anticipate.
I love that you brought up the storytelling aspect and knowing how to tell a story through this visual media. Can you talk a little bit about what that process was, especially when you reflect back on the first project? I mean, you probably had never even really held a video camera before. And you're like, yeah, I could do this with all that gumption. Into like, where your projects are now, and just sort of like how you've honed that craft of storytelling.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so growing up, my mom was an amateur photographer. And so photography had a bit of a presence in my childhood, for you as well, with your mom. And when I applied to college, I actually applied to an architecture program, which is what I started down the path of for a few days. But as part of the application process, you had to submit an artistic portfolio in any medium. And so what I did was borrowed my mom's film camera and went on some hikes around our house and took photos and culled the ones that I thought were best and sent those in as my portfolio. And that got me into the program. I think I had been interested in visual storytelling in a way, though I wouldn't have called it that at the time, for a long time. And when we sat down to make that first project, I think we were thinking very much about, all right, how do you film this neighborhood in a way that feels revealing of it and tell some truth about the story? How do you film an interview with a person that allows us to really focus on them, doesn't diminish them in any way, and so on. So I think it's a sort of thing that is, in some ways, it's actually kind of difficult to explain in words and easier to explain in pictures and in kind of demonstration. But a lot of working with different visual ideas, seeing what works, what doesn't, and watching other people's work, whether that's a friend's film or just television, movies, and seeing what I like, what I don't like, and being specific about that. What aspect of this excites me or disappoints me? How might I want to emulate it or do something different? One
thing that I find really rewarding about crafting these stories, these documentaries, is that we get an opportunity to become an expert on a topic for a short time and really dive in and learn a lot. And what is most important to me is to find the right people to help tell that story. So though we're very much, drivers of the story, we're looking for the people who are closest to the story and trying to elevate their voices and present them in a way that when they watch the film back, they say, yes, that feels right. That's what I wanted to convey. So it's really about, doing a lot of research into, who are the people who are closest to the story. In the case of our first film, it was about this neighborhood. So finding the people who had lived there for generations, and others who had maybe moved away, but still had a very close personal connection to this neighborhood. So really, asking people over and over, okay, who else should we talk to? Who else do we need to sit down with? And making sure that those people are really represented.
How do you decide what projects that you're going to take on and what stories you want to tell?
I think that's the answer to that for me. It continues to change. I think initially it's simply a question of what inspires you. What is a nugget of a story that you hear and you think, I want to understand that better. And as time goes on, then you kind of layer onto that the experience of what it takes to make a project, how long it may take, how much money it may take, what it means to get that out and connect with an audience. Are you connecting to an audience through a nonprofit organization, through a television channel, through a film distribution company? What sort of connections to those entities do you have? How can you get to them? And that is going to shape what story you feel, okay, I'm inspired by this, but I don't actually know how to get it to that audience. And so,
Right.
It's like it could be a tree falling in the forest if no one's around to see it or hear it, and so it's become a sort of complicated question, I think. But at its root, it's got to be, I think, a project where you feel people really ought to know this story. And we've said before that a big thing that we try to do in our work is take people to places that are hard to see. And they might be hard to see for reasons of access. You can't get into that building or behind the walls of that organization. They might be hard to see because it's a family story. Somebody could sit down, you could sit down and talk to your grandmother or your cousin, but I can't. How can we bring somebody into that space so they can hear a story that matters to your family, but also matters a lot potentially for other people too, and might resonate to others? How can we take people to places that are hard to see? And I think in all of our work, we're still trying to do that. We're still trying to figure out what it is, what is that nugget where we think, this is not something that is easily observed, but other people would really benefit from knowing this. And let's see if we can tell an engaging story about it.
Yeah, and I think the most recent film that we made, it was also a matter of proximity and a feeling of urgency, because we live in Richmond, Virginia, and when the social justice protests began after George Floyd's murder, those were happening very close to, or really in our neighborhood, and along Monument Avenue, where Confederate statues were concentrated. And we'd lived in Richmond for several years at that point, and we felt that this was a very different moment. It could be a huge shift in the city's history, its past, its present. And so, we were compelled to document what was happening. And then not only document what was happening, but also then look into the long history behind that moment to explore the long history of protest against these monuments, and basically what it all meant, and make sure that, people years from now can go back and see this film and maybe get a sense of just how significant that time was. So that too is compelling to us, to make sure that those moments aren't lost to history.
Yeah, in documentary film, a moment happens once and then it's gone, right? And so you can't really go back and recreate it with truth. And so when we saw this history unfolding literally on the street that we lived on, and in our immediate neighborhood, we knew that if we didn't capture it now, it might not be captured. And sure enough, so many things have happened here in the last year and a half to offer a massive understatement. But in terms of the monuments, so much was covered up by the city very quickly, and it was actually very difficult to tell that story just even a few months later. And so the fact that we got into the streets with cameras very quickly and started telling that story, and also doing interviews with people while protests were still going on nightly. And so these questions were very urgent and very real to people. They weren't hypothetical or abstract. They weren't trying to think back. They were talking about how things felt right now. That meant we were able to make a film that was a lot more potent than it would have been if we launched in on that today. So I think it takes sometimes a degree of boldness with a project that you take on, of not quite knowing how you're going to get to the finish line, but knowing that if you don't start walking down the path, you'll really wonder what that path might have looked like.
Yeah, no, I love that, the fact that students can go on their phone, right, and just start documenting things that are happening in their neighborhood. You don't necessarily need to have a fancy camera that costs XYZ amount of money. We have the technology now that's living in our hands, where we can be leaders and documentarians of our own lives and our own neighborhoods and communities. So I'm glad that you brought that up. We now actually have some awesome student questions, and so we're going to get into them. One is, when there is a sense of urgency as the reason why you decide to make a film, how does that affect the timeline in creating the story you want to tell?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, in deciding to start documenting what was happening in the summer of 2020, we thought, we need to get cameras on the ground now, and we need to make sure this comes out pretty quickly. So directly to your point about timing, we thought, okay, we're going to give ourselves a deadline. We want this film to come out a year from now. So we're going to start filming June of 2020. We want this to premiere June 2021. And we knew that was important because we imagined that people's attention spans would wane, and that there'd be more news about other things, and that this was an opportunity to kind of grab people's attention, and that might not last. So we did really hit the ground running. We filmed from June to October. We edited from October to January, and then January to June, we were doing all the polishing, making all the colors pop, music, all those things, to really make sure that it had a compelling feel and style. And we did premiere it in June of 2021, and over 700 people came from all over Richmond to gather in one place and view this film together and have conversation. And I don't know if that would have happened if we had premiered it, even a few months later, certainly years later. So there are those compelling reasons to make sure that that you not only start at a urgent point, but that you're also sharing it at that same urgent time too.
Yeah. Several times when you guys have answered questions, you've alluded to the filmmaking process.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, we just see the finished product, whether it's, a 30-minute documentary, 10-minute short film, or a feature length 2 hours, right? Can you talk a little bit more? I mean, you talked a little bit now about, when you went out and you actually recorded, and then you were in the editing room, and then, of course, you were doing your polishing, and you've mentioned, of course, thinking about distribution and how you get your money. Can you just give a little bit more insight into that entire process?
Sure. It is a process. For the projects that we've done in the past few years, we found that we've been recruiting large teams. And so we're working on a project right now. We've been working on it for the last year. We have about 40 people supporting that. The Monuments film, we also had a team of about 40. And that comes from personal relationships via past projects. It comes from recommendations. It comes from sometimes just reaching out to people fresh whom we've never worked with, but we admire their work, and recruiting them to come on board. All of that in the service of the vision that Hannah mentioned earlier, of figuring out how we can get as close as possible to the story and make sure we're amplifying people's voices in the most effective way. It's a question to a degree of funding. Who are the people that you can connect with to really elevate that vision? You can make a film for pennies. You can make a film for a lot more than that, and those are different types of films, and one is not necessarily better than the other, but it is different. And so knowing what you have to work with up front is really going to shape so many of those decisions. Who am I going to hire? How many people am I going to try to hire? How quickly or slowly am I going to do this? Am I going to do this mainly close to home, or am I going to travel for it? You can make a good film, regardless of how you answer those questions. But depending on how you answer those, your budget may shape that. So that's definitely a part of it as well. And I think length, format, that's a really important question to think about. We've done projects where the shortest of the videos we've made is about a minute long, and the longest is 89 minutes long, and they have different kind of uses in different places. So for example, in 2016, we decided that we wanted to make a film about the history and the legacy of lynching in the American South. And one reason we did this, a huge reason we did this, we had been working with a lot of history teachers who said that they really didn't know this history. And we'd also been doing a lot of work with history professors who, the more we talked to them and the more that we heard lectures that they were giving to these teacher workshops that we were helping to facilitate, the more we were struck by the centrality of lynching to the history they were telling of America, right? How these historians understood that racial violence is really at the core of so much of what American history has been. That was not how American history was taught when I was in school, even when I was an undergraduate student. And that was the sort of thing that once you learn it for the first time, you say, well, my God, other people need to know this. And you start talking to teachers, to classroom teachers, and some of them felt, I have a sense for this history, but I have no tools to teach this. I don't really, the textbook that we've been given, it doesn't really go into this, maybe there's some websites, but I don't really know. And so we set out from the beginning wanting to make this film specifically as a teaching tool. And so one thing that meant for us was that it needed to be fairly brief. And so we made a half-hour film, with the idea being that it could either be played during a class period and there would still be time to talk about it and teach around it, or it could be assigned for homework. And because it's not some 2-hour epic, kids, or multi-parted 8-part series, as some of these historical documentaries are, that people would actually have time to sit down and watch it. And one of the first screenings that we did was with a community group in Columbia, South Carolina. And there's people who came together from time to time, sometimes to watch films together. And somebody came up to us and said, I really appreciate that it's just 33 minutes long. She said, most of the films that we've watched are hour and a half, 2 hours. We get here at the end of a long day. We've all been to work. We've taken our kids to this thing and that thing. We've had to shop for groceries. We're tired. And so we come in, we watch the film, and then we go home. We have a long day tomorrow, The fact that yours was a half hour long meant that we could watch it, and we could actually talk about it together. And that stuck with me so much. And I think no matter what the length of your project, it just kind of speaks to thinking about how it could actually be used and received, and making sure that you shape it at every nook and cranny, from the crew to the length to the style, in a way that's going to connect with that audience that you're most seeking.
I think the two maybe most surprising aspects of documentary filmmaking are how much planning is involved. That there are certainly like verite style, so you're just kind of going out the camera and observing, but even those, you're making so many decisions about when, where, how, who. You may only be able to afford so many days of filming. You have to get crew together, so you have to have a schedule, and you have to have location agreements and a lot of those logistical elements. And I think the other thing that might be surprising for folks is how much work it requires after the film is done to make sure that the film is actually reaching people. Yeah. We spent much longer getting an outrage, the film Lance was talking about, out into schools and communities. We made the film over the course of 9 months, and then we spent about 2 years touring it, going to 25 states. And because otherwise, if you make a film and you don't put in that kind of work, it could just sit there and not do anything. So you really have to put in the effort to make sure it's reaching the audiences you want it to.
I want to talk a little bit about you guys as business owners, right? We're saying like you're filmmakers, but you're hiring folks, you have a studio. So how did you transition into doing the business side of filmmaking?
I'll say for myself, somewhat reluctantly. I being somebody who studied the humanities and often looks with a very skeptical eye at corporations and their movements, I almost took it as an offense when we were having dinner with a friend about 15 years ago at this point. We were talking about some early work that we were doing on a couple of videos, and she said, "Gosh, you guys are really entrepreneurial." And that word entrepreneurial struck me as almost like a 4-letter word at the time. Ugh, kind of bristled at that. I've come to see that there is a way in which marshaling the efforts of a budget and management and recruitment of the right people can really elevate the vision and can help a story to go much farther than it would otherwise. And I think that is why it's ultimately been an inspiring path to go down in running this as a business rather than just kind of a side project, because we've been able to go so much, to take these stories so much farther, and thus to do those stories justice in a real way. And since so much of our work engages with justice, it matters. You know, we're not making films about things that are of marginal importance. We're making films about things that they really matter. And so we need to make sure that our effort really matters as well. And a reality has been, you know, as with anything in life, it costs money often to make it happen. And so finding a way to do that that is sustainable means running a business. And one thing that running a business that is sustainable means is growing that business, at least steadily over time. And so it's been a thing that we've needed to commit to. And though I think I started down that path reluctantly, I've come to see the value in that. And you know, once you're able to bring on people to your project, no matter what your field is, who can push and elevate your work and your vision farther, and you see the impact of that, it inspires you to want to figure out a way to keep doing it.
You agree, Hannah? Okay.
Well, I'll just add that, you know, I think it also gives us legitimacy. And, you know, early on, it was really just the two of us picking up a camera and a audio recorder and going out. And, but as we built up our skills and experience, you know, having a company name and brand and website to lean on, it really helped us build, you know, what kind of projects we could take on. People trusted that, you know, we could deliver. And I think the most exciting part of the business is that we have the opportunity to hire people, and that we can do that really responsibly and think about, you know, who might not typically have this opportunity. And yeah, just try to do it in a way that feels like we're bringing together a really great group of people who want to work together and want to see out this vision together.
Great. So another student question. Which story have you told and or heard that is your favorite, and why?
Oh boy. Boy, that's difficult.
That is hard. That is hard. I think one story that sticks out to me is that we had the chance to go to a place called Manzanar, which is in Central California. It was a place where Japanese American citizens were incarcerated, imprisoned during World War II. And I'd never seen one of these kinds of facilities before, and they've really preserved them and recreated them to give you a sense of just what this was like for these families, who many of whom were living in Los Angeles area. They were bussed up to Manzanar and held there throughout the war. And we had the amazing opportunity to meet a woman who was 92 years old at the time, who was a girl when this happened to her family. And she was at Manzanar during the war. And we got a chance to sit down with her and hear her stories, hear about how cold it was and how challenging it was to just keep her spirits up, but also that she found, you know, her best friend there and the man that she would marry. And so those kinds of details that make that kind of experience so textured and real, and that it, you know, it's part of this massive event that's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but to hear about her personal experience and her memories was really remarkable.
And about 12 stories come to my mind, so I will just not add on to that, because that's such a beautiful example of something that we've had a privilege to tell a story about, and I completely agree with all that.
You know, it makes me think there's something about the way that you must approach people that makes them trust you with these stories. What do you think that is about the ways in which you work together that allows people to feel vulnerable, open, honest, and transparent with you to create these stories?
I don't know exactly, but I do know that we go in with work on these projects genuinely and honestly. And whatever successes or failures in terms of how we've told a story, we've never lied to anyone. We've never promised that we're going to do X and then we did Y. We've never been disingenuous. We've always tried really hard. And I think, and I hope people see that. When we were setting about to make this film on the history and legacy of lynching, one thing that we felt was very important was to include the stories of descendants of people who were killed. And we did research and learned about families and descendants who had been trying to, tell these stories in their town and make these stories clearer to their communities. And we reached out to some of these people and explained what our project was. And we said very bluntly in emails and letters that we sent, we said, look, we're not well-known documentary filmmakers. We're not coming in with the budget of some network. We were doing this entirely independently. We had both quit our jobs a few months before specifically to come and make this film. We had saved up enough money for a few months. We were making this out of our own pockets. So we said, we don't have a lot to offer in the sense of, track record or any of that. But what we can offer is that if you'll sit down with us and help us tell this story, a story that really needs to be told well, we will work extremely hard to make sure that other people see it. We will work extremely hard to make sure that it gets out there and that it is, brought into schools and all of that. And so when we started getting these invitations and opportunities to go and screen the film, we said yes and yes and yes again and again. And that's why we ended up taking it to 80 sites in 25 states over the next 2 years, because we had made that promise to people. That's why we ended up partnering with Learning for Justice, the history arm of the Southern Poverty Law Center, the racial justice organization in Alabama. We did that to fulfill that commitment. And I think in everything we've done in this work, we've tried to, and we have been straightforward with people, and we'll hope that they've seen that. And, as Hannah said earlier, the highest compliment that we've received is when somebody who is very close to a story, who worked with us on a project, watches the film and says, yeah, I think you got that right, because they know it. And the currency of this work is truth. And the closer we can get to that, then the better we're succeeding.
I love that the currency of this work is truth. That's awesome. Great.
And I think the other thing that helps is that the first conversations that we have with everyone that may ultimately become part of a film, we're just approaching them as people. We don't arrive with a camera. We don't call them immediately, say when can we schedule an interview. We want to get to know them. We want to give them a chance to get to know us. And when we are at the point of actually filming an interview, sometimes you'll hear an interview being done and they'll say, okay, so I'm not going to be on camera. So when you answer the question, please include part of my question in your answer. And I find that just so challenging to do and unnatural. And so even though it's hard because there's all this equipment and it's not a natural feeling setting, filming an interview, we try as hard as we can just to make it feel like a conversation. And we're listening and reacting, and we may have a list of questions, but usually we don't refer to them till the very end, because what we want is just to really listen and follow up about something that we want to learn more about. If they're clearly, if there's some story that needs to be, we need to dive in further, we'll ask about that. And only at the end do we think, okay, I meant to ask you about this thing. But make it as much of a conversation as possible. And I think that way folks will really kind of open up and feel like, well, you really care. You're not just going through a list of questions, you actually want to understand.
Yeah, it sounds like you really center the humanity of folks. So that's great and amazing. So obviously we're a reading organization. We believe in the power of reading. We'd love to hear any authors that inspired you either growing up, or who are you reading currently?
Mm-hmm. You've been reading a couple of interesting books recently.
Yeah. Well, I'll say that one really interesting thing that I kind of go to again is memoirs, because so much of our work is about trying to kind of reveal people's humanity, and I really enjoy kind of understanding how people come to be who they are. So Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson was a big influence for one of our projects. Michelle Obama's Becoming, I really enjoyed.
My favorites.
Yeah, nice. And also because we do a lot of family stories, I enjoy kind of intergenerational stories like Homegoing by Gyasi, and just kind of stories that kind of put you in a totally different time and place. So I just finished a book called Behold the Dreamers, about a couple from Cameroon that come to New York and seek out the American dream, and whether that is or is not something that's obtainable.
Yeah, I would agree with all of those and those books. I just finished reading a book that was inspired by some work we're doing now. We've been, as I said, doing a project over the last year. We've traveled to 6 cities to film that, one of which has been Houston, which I've really not spent time in prior, but now we've been there 3 or 4 times in the last 6 months. And it's been a fascinating place to discover. It's the 4th largest city in the United States, but it's not a part of the conversation, culturally, in the way that New York or Los Angeles is, for example. And it's been a really interesting place to discover. And there's a novel called Memorial, written by a guy named Bryan Washington, who grew up there, and I think may even still live there, that takes place in Houston and in Tokyo. And it's this just really beautiful story. And like a number of novels that I've really enjoyed, it's a novel in which kind of multiple storylines are happening at the same time on top of each other, in parallel places. And I guess there's a lot of that in filmmaking. It's kind of juggling storylines and figuring out how to weave together and how to find some greater reality out of all that you wouldn't see if you were just kind of following a single storyline's path. There's a book from about 10 years ago by Jennifer Egan called A Visit from the Goon Squad that does this really brilliantly as well, won a Pulitzer Prize. So those come to mind. I think a degree of creative storytelling, but really rooted in a profound degree of humanity. One other book that comes to mind on that front, which is kind of filmic, is this book called Hamnet that came out about a year or two ago. That is a lightly fictionalized version of the kind of childhood of some of William Shakespeare's kids, but it really focuses on his wife, who ends up being a 4, 5, 10-dimensional character, and it has enough humanity and emotion in it to wallop you for a year. So that's I think stories with a great degree of humanity and drama really capture my attention.
Awesome. So what does leadership mean to you, and how can our students show up as leaders in their lives?
I think leadership means to me having a vision and inspiring people to help you see out that vision. I think one thing that is undervalued when it comes to leadership is the ability to listen and to ask lots of questions. I feel like, sometimes you might think of a leader and you think of someone who's making speeches and declaring lots of things. But I think to get to that point, you have to have a deep understanding of your community, of the issues that you care about. And so I think there's hardly a more important skill to develop than the skill of asking questions, being curious, and listening, because that will give you the ability to figure out what you care about, what others care about, how you can kind of come together to work for a common cause, and to develop that vision that you can really get behind and inspire others to get behind as well.
I agree with that. And I think one thing that I've learned about my job in the last few years is that so much of it, in terms of working with a film crew on set or a larger team spread out over many locations, so much of that is keeping people's spirits up and keeping them convinced that it matters for them to be contributing to this project. Right? Yes, we're editing. Yes, we're helping to storytell. Yes, we're recruiting and working on funding and all these other things that we've talked about. But none of that is going to happen. It's certainly not going to happen without pain. If people don't feel inspired by the project, and if they don't feel a degree of hopefulness and optimism about their work. And we filmed in a lot of difficult places. Sometimes took forever to drive there. It was freezing cold. We didn't have enough time. Oh, the light is going away. There's a million reasons why filming things can be fraught with urgency and stress. And our role as the leaders of that team is to be even keeled, is to have a smile on our face if it makes sense, but also not to pretend that things are okay if they're actually difficult, to level with people, again, to be honest. I think that mix of honesty, keeping people's spirits up, and finding ways to keep reminding people in little ways even why the project matters, why we're here, why we're doing this. That is so crucial to effective leadership, because if you can keep the team on board and keep the team together, then the team will succeed.
Great, thank you guys. Well, we're basically out of time, but I still have one last question before we leave here. If I can just have you here for just a couple more minutes. But man, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you for all of the inspiring words and really being open, vulnerable, and transparent with the audience here. So I appreciate that. What would you tell your 10-year-old self?
I would tell my 10-year-old self, don't worry too much about figuring out what you're going to do in life. And, the coming years will present so many opportunities to explore and do such a variety of things, and things that will actually be a lot harder to find chances to do later in life. I can't think of the last time I did a science experiment or, went with a big group of people to a museum and explored together. So don't close any doors before you have to, and just enjoy all the opportunities, seize all the opportunities that come your way. I think the last thing I would say is in the long term, it's much more valuable to be kind than to be cool.
So
be
true.
kind. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I think I would say to my 10-year-old self that there are going to be days ahead that are harder than anything you can imagine right now. And there are going to be days ahead that are more uplifting and more beautiful than anything you can imagine right now. And no matter what, you should find something that you care about and really care about it. And you will never regret that. Even if that thing hurts, even if it falls apart, especially if it soars and succeeds, you will be grateful that you cared. And you really can't go wrong if you dig in and care really hard about something. You'll learn more about yourself, about the world, about people around you. And it's never time wasted.
Oh my God. Thank you guys so much. Lance, Hannah, I appreciate you on Friday taking some time to speak with our students. Everyone, thank you all for coming with us on this journey through Read to Lead Live for this school year, and we will see you next school year. Enjoy the summer, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Kamara. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.